Varkas looked for a highly intense, deeply silent moment at the ruby brooch, which was actively blazing exactly like a captured piece of violent fire in his massive palm. Then, completely without a word, he walked up to the Eastern merchant and paid the exorbitant price in heavy gold coins. Talia looked down at the ruby brooch now resting in her own hand with a sharp, incredibly bitter feeling of intense annoyance. "Is there absolutely anything else you highly desperately require, Your Grace?" Varkas asked. His voice was entirely indifferent, almost clinical, but to Talia's paranoid ears, his simple words felt incredibly probing. Exactly as if he were actively looking right through her skull to find the secret she was hiding. She violently forced her blue gaze away from the shimmering moonstone she had left behind on the velvet. Absolutely no need. Everything else in this pathetic shop is highly mediocre at best. At her highly indifferent, aristocratic answer, the Eastern merchant's face barely, highly noticeably wrinkled in a brief flash of deep professional insult. Varkas immediately stepped closer and firmly hugged her fragile waist with his massive arm to support her. Because of the intense physical weakness in her mangled legs, she was actively staggering every now and then, her crushed knees threatening to buckle entirely under her weight. It was a highly familiar touch now, one that no longer felt entirely alien or repulsive. She entirely calmly, highly pathetically allowed him to physically pick her up and carry her directly out of the jewelry shop and into the cool air of the trading house. Outside, their elite Eastern vassals, including the heavily scarred Lord Derendrew Siorcan, were already waiting for them in a rigid military formation. One of the high-ranking knights stepped forward with a highly serious, deeply grim look and formally reported. "The formal military market inspection has been completely finished, Commander. Supplies are currently stable, and the main Eastern goods are actively in circulation." The knight hesitated slightly. However, there have been quite a few heavy complaints from the local merchants about the increasingly unstable security situation on the roads. Varkas, passing along the now noticeably empty passage with Talia in his arms, turned his dark head sharply. "Are there significant problems with the provincial patrol guards?" "It is entirely probably not about the quality of the guards, my lord. It is simply that the local robber clans have become significantly more active and highly aggressive lately. Violent attacks on traveling traders have become much more frequent in the border regions." A highly slight, deeply intense crease appeared entirely on Varkas's dark forehead. The vassal added cautiously, lowering his voice. "Lord Dorkeen has formally requested an immediate audience with you to discuss this lethal matter." "What exactly should we formally do?" "Fine. First, I will go and speak with him directly." Stroking his sharp chin with his free hand, Varkas nodded decisively. Talia, watching his severe profile furtively from her position in his arms, suddenly felt a sharp pang of regret. The vivid image of the moonstone she had left behind, the stone that looked exactly like his eyes, violently flashed before her mind's eye again. So exactly what if I left it? The moonstone is nothing but a piece of polished rock. It's nonsense. I can do perfectly well without it. Talia tried to desperately convince herself. But the heavy, suffocating feeling of intense regret absolutely did not go away. When they finally left the massive trading house and headed toward the heavy carriage, she was completely overcome by a highly strange, deeply obsessive anxiety. What if I never see a stone with such a cold, beautiful radiance ever again in my life? Once safely settled back in the carriage cushions, Talia stared irritably at the ruby brooch and aggressively looked out the window. Outside, Varkas was currently conferring intensely with his elite vassals about something, probably giving highly lethal orders to the knightly corps. Talia did absolutely not hesitate for even a second. She immediately reached into the carriage's hidden storage compartment where Varkas kept his travel essentials. After going through Varkas's personal things with shaking fingers, she finally found what she was looking for, a heavy leather bag filled to the brim with Imperial gold coins. She quickly, frantically tucked the heavy gold pouch into the thick, luxurious silk folds of her azure dress and carefully, highly painfully crawled out the opposite side of the carriage. The Eastern soldiers were currently busy packing the massive piles of wedding gifts from the local nobility into the supply wagons. Taking massive advantage of the chaotic military commotion, Talia crossed the muddy road and entered the shopping arcade again. Many of the smaller shops were already closing for the evening, the traders hastily collecting their remaining goods. She pulled her heavy silk hood significantly tighter over her face and began to painfully make her way through the thick, jostling crowd. Her crushed legs ached with an incredibly intense tension. A sharp, grinding pain went directly up from her mangled knees and deep into her pelvis with every single step, but Talia did absolutely not pay the slightest attention to the agony. She was possessed. When she finally reached the exclusive jewelry store, she quickly, highly aggressively walked straight up to the counter. The exact same moonstone, looking so incredibly similar to the cold, deep eyes of Varkas, still lay exactly where she had left it on the crimson velvet pillow, shimmering with a soft, haunting blue light. She picked it up with a trembling hand, looked at it for an incredibly long time, and finally turned to the merchant. "I am buying this stone immediately." The man looked at her in absolute surprise, but almost immediately his face bloomed with a highly greedy, professional smile. "You possess a highly delicate, incredibly refined taste, my lady. This moonstone is a genuine rarity in the East, amazing shine, unique interior pattern. Usually, we sell it for at least 35 silver soldoms. But for the new Grand Duchess, I am willing to give it for 30 gold soldoms." Talia listened with only half an ear, already opening the stolen leather pouch. And then an incredibly mocking, deeply annoying teenage voice came from directly behind her. "You're nothing but a pathetic fraud, old man. Is a common moonstone really worth 30 gold pieces? I think not." She turned around sharply and was surprised to recognize the golden eyes of Varkas Laedgo Siorcan. Varkas's younger brother stared mockingly at the stone in her hand, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's not even worth 5 coins in a real market. This? Exactly what kind of absolute, treasonous nonsense are you talking about?" The merchant rose up, almost screaming with professional indignation. "This is a highly rare stone. Look at the incredible play of light. Patterns like this are truly rare in the northern mines. Still absolutely not worth 30 gold soldoms. This is more than a fair price for a duchess. If I put it up for a formal auction, it would go for even more than 50. Talia abruptly interrupted the merchant, who was currently burning with loud indignation. She silently, highly arrogantly poured a massive pile of heavy gold coins directly onto the velvet counter. With a loud, incredibly rich ringing sound, the heavy gold coins minted by the Imperial Mint fell onto the crimson velvet. At the very first glance, it was glaringly clear to everyone that there were significantly more than 30 coins in that pile. She stuffed the moonstone deep into her hidden dress pocket and nodded her chin with absolute, crushing imperial arrogance. "I am far too lazy to count such a pathetic amount. Figure it out for yourself and keep the change." Turning around with a cold swish of her silk skirts, she left the shop and saw 3 or 4 of Varkas's elite horsemen standing at the entrance. It looked like they had come highly quickly to fetch her. After looking at them appraisingly and with absolute imperial disdain for a moment, Talia raised her chin high and walked right past them. But she didn't have the time to go far before Varkas caught up with her, his face flushed. "Hey! If you act like that without permission, my brother will." "Exactly who do you think you are calling hey?" She shot such a fierce, highly lethal look at the teenager that the young man immediately lowered his golden eyes in a reflexive flinch. It was clearly the lingering psychological consequence of Varkas's diligent parenting over the last few days. Containing his obvious irritation, Varkas corrected himself with a scowl. "I only wanted to say. You absolutely cannot leave like that without a formal guard retinue, sister-in-law. I was going to come back to the carriage immediately. I do not need a babysitter." But you must warn the commander. What if something highly tragic happens to you out here in the crowd? My brother would skin us alive. Talia abruptly, violently threw Lucas's hand off her shoulder. I am absolutely not a pathetic prisoner of the Siorcan house, boy. I do absolutely not have to account to you or anyone else for my every single step. That's absolutely not what I meant at all. If suddenly something happens. Not listening to a single one of his teenage reproaches, Talia headed straight toward the main square. Meanwhile, the elite knights had already saddled their massive horses and were waiting to leave. Talia hurried to the carriage, and at that exact moment, Varkas, who was currently talking nearby with some local nobleman, cast a single, incredibly cold, deeply piercing glance directly at her. Talia swallowed nervously. Is he actually angry that she left without warning? Or did he already realize she stole his gold? While she was tensely, highly frantically wondering what his reaction would be, Varkas simply sighed heavily and briefly, coldly nodded his chin toward the open carriage door. Sit down inside, Talia. We are moving out. Varkas turned his back to her. I will be riding on horseback for this leg of the journey. Then he walked away toward his waiting knights. Talia sighed with a massive, shaky burst of relief and climbed into the carriage. A few minutes later, the massive carriage set off along the main cobblestone street of the city. Talia took the moonstone out of her bosom. The light blue mineral glowed dimly, hauntingly in the gathering twilight of the carriage interior. Exactly like a poor person holding a rare jewel for the absolute first time in her life, she looked at it for an incredibly long time, then hid it back against her skin and turned her gaze to the window. A few hours ago the eastern sky had been perfectly clear, but now it was entirely covered with heavy, lead-gray clouds. The sharp, metallic smell of rain crept into the cold, no longer summer air. Exactly as she had expected, the second the carriage left the protection of the high city walls, the gloomy clouds began to drizzle. Talia pressed her pale cheek against the cold glass and peered ahead. On a distant, rocky hill, almost entirely hidden in a thick shroud of gray rain, stood a highly rough-looking, incredibly gloomy stone castle. It was probably Dorkeen. Thank you deeply for your auspicious visit, Your Grace. When they finally arrived at the massive iron gate, a man wearing a heavy brown bearskin cape ran out of the castle into the mud. He was a middle-aged man with a thick, unkempt black beard. He respectfully, almost fearfully bowed to Varkas, who was riding at the head of the column. This is formally the absolute first time I have the honor of meeting you, Your Grace. I am Dorkeen, the sovereign manager of this border region. Varkas jumped off his massive horse into the mud and nodded indifferently. Varkas Laedgo Siorcan. Looking at the new Grand Duke with intense curiosity and a touch of greed, Yuzan smiled softly. You've come an incredibly long way, my lord. Please, come inside immediately. We have prepared a truly magnificent, highly lavish feast for you and your men. Thank you for your concern. After exchanging formal military politeness, Varkas handed the reins to a waiting servant and headed straight toward Talia's carriage. The Imperial girl stood in the drizzling rain at the carriage step, cowering away from the cold. Varkas immediately, entirely seamlessly opened the massive tails of his heavy black cloak and covered her head with them to shield her from the rain. Yuzan Dorkeen watched this protective gesture with keen, calculating interest, and then addressed her with deep respect. This incredibly beautiful lady must surely be the new Grand Duchess. It is a profound honor to meet you, Your Highness. Please, just call me Yuzan. Talia just bowed her head slightly in a highly cold response. A little embarrassed by her lack of warmth, the manager quickly changed his tone to a more welcoming one. It is a truly great honor for us to receive you both. I promise I will do everything humanly possible to make you feel comfortable in my humble home. Leave the useless ceremony, Yuzan, Talia snapped impatiently. Show me to your guest chambers immediately. You're not going to leave us standing here in the rain all night, are you? Her incredibly harsh, imperial tone made the man jump and hurry up the stone steps. "Oh, 1,000 apologies, Your Highness. Please, come right this way." They entered a huge, highly oppressive stone building. The pungent smell of burning wet wood and cheap wax. Candles immediately filled her nose. Talia, clinging tightly to Varkas's side as he supported her, cautiously, highly suspiciously examined the gloomy castle interior. It appeared to have been built during the ancient age of kingdoms. Inside there was only darkness, dampness, and a highly heavy, suffocating spirit of long-term desolation. "You can stop here." Yuzan led them to the main bedroom on the second floor. It was surprisingly cozy and well-equipped compared to the rest of the ruin.